Well, hello and welcome to Napa Valley Wine Academy's South Africa Travel Panel. I'm Stephen and I'm an educator with Napa Valley Wine Academy. And with me, I have a group of people who have all been to South Africa and have experiences to tell us about them. Below me, I have Michelle and Toby, who are both in the real estate industry. They're from Rhode Island. Now, Michelle has her level 3 award in wine, while Toby's more of an enthusiast who just really enjoys travel and drinking wine and things. To the bottom right, we have Marcos, who is a doctor, and he's been doing a lot of wine education for quite a number of years. And recently, he passed his WSET diploma in wines, and we're really proud of Marcos because he won the award for the D6 award for the top assessment for D6, which is a big assignment, and he's using his stipend that he received to actually do some research on Pinotage in South Africa. Congratulations on that, Marcos. And then finally, we have Fiona McDonald, who is the regional chair for South Africa at the Decanter Wine Awards. She is a journalist by trade. She has the Cape Wine Academy diploma, and she spent 8 years as the editor of the wine magazine in Cape Town. What I think is really cool about Fiona, she sort of has lived through the emergence of the South African wine industry from post-apartheid to what it's become now, and it's certainly changed a lot in that time. She's been a contributing member to other publications as well, and most importantly, she is our expert on the ground for all things South Africa, and she led our trip, which we did earlier this year in January. So everyone, welcome, and thank you for coming along today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Now, if you are watching our broadcast live, we do have Jean Cox. She'll be in the comments answering any of your questions. She is our travel coordinator. She is the most traveled person in our organisation. She has been to South Africa, so if you have questions about South Africa or any of our other trips or just wine travel in general, please just type them in the comments. Right, let's get on to South Africa. So, top picture, I think, is for Marcos. Marcos, you're on the East Coast. How did you get to the South African wine regions?
So it was a long flight, but it was very easy. I had somebody drive me to Newark Airport, and there is a United Airlines direct flight to Cape Town. So it couldn't have been easier, and arrived there on Saturday evening after I think about 15 hours of flight. So I slept most of it.
Okay, excellent. And then Michelle and Toby, I know you're also on the East Coast. I think you're on the bottom pitch image there. You took a slightly different route. How did you get there?
We did. We went through Boston to London, London direct from London to Cape Town. And to be honest with you, I am a fan of direct flights. And for me, though, I thought the transitions were easy. We were able to organize our time and sleep and relax. And when we arrived, I think we arrived pretty refreshed and ready to go. Yeah.
Okay, and Fiona, anything to add there? Is there any other places you'd fly into or any other direct flights that you'd suggest?
Um, no, I think that is one of the best options available, well, two of the best options available. The hubs, Dubai or Qatar Airlines are about the other two that I would recommend. And anywhere in Europe, if you fly KLM to Amsterdam or Air France to Paris, it's going to be pretty much the same experience as flying to London. But yeah, direct United Airlines Newark Cape Town is probably your best option because most of the other direct flights will route you to Johannesburg, and then you've got to do deplane and do customs, and then catch an internal or domestic flight.
Okay,
So it just adds another level of complexity.
sure. Okay, so Cape Town's the way to go then. Okay, so once you are there, so Toby, Michelle, I think you stayed in Stellenbosch. Did you have any issues with currency or language or anything like that?
It was so simple. The accommodations were really lovely. We had the Stellenbosch is very walkable. It's a college town, and we found the exchange rate to be very be very helpful for travelers. And we had some, we'll get into the meals, I'm sure, but we had some remarkable meals, and we found the opportunity to exchange money or to use our credit card for the most part was something that we did, and we found it to be so simple. Language, no problem. People are multilingual in South Africa, and they're ready to help, ready to be willing to give directions, ready to give any advice. So it was just so smooth. It
Yeah,
really was.
absolutely. It was a great way just to start the whole week in Stellenbosch, and then all the way along, the value was there. We kept remarking over and over that we were amazed at the exchange rate and how far at least the U.S. dollar will go. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but it was an outstanding value. So.
Okay, so easy to use a credit card then. Stellenbosch at least is walkable. Marcos, I know you spent a little time beforehand in Cape Town, and you did a little bit of travel to some wine regions, as by yourself. Did you, public transport or taxis? How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I hired a driver. Had somebody pick me up at the airport and drive me to French Hook, which is where I was based for a few days before Stellenbosch. And French Hook is also very walkable. It's a much smaller town. Um, in French Hook, you can pretty much walk through the town and to the restaurants very, very easily. If you're going to go to a lot of the wineries, you may want to either take an Uber, which was super easy and very affordable as well, or again, having a driver is really the way to go. For a lot of us who are not used to driving on the left-hand side and also visiting wineries, it's one less worry to have somebody who can drive you. And the people there were amazing. The drivers were very knowledgeable about, of course, South Africa, about the Western Cape, but also about wine and wine history. So I had a great time, just one on one with my driver for many days. We really enjoyed the time together. And from Franschhoek, it's easy to get to Parel. It's easy to get to Stellenbosch as well. So I found it a good place to start. And of course, Stellenbosch was, as Toby and Michelle have mentioned, great, very walkable, and you're right in the middle of everything that's going on in the wine world.
Yeah, excellent. Now, Fiona, what time of year would you actually suggest visiting? Like, when is the best time?
Um, it's a difficult one. The best time of year is obviously during harvest because that's when you can kind of see a lot of what goes into winemaking happening. But the drawback of that is that the people you'd like to engage with, the winemakers, etc., are at their busiest. If you think about it, a winemaker only gets a chance of maybe 40 chances in his lifetime to do what he does best. And this is smack dab in it. So being given quality time with winemakers at that time of the year, and here I'm talking from January all the way through to April when the last grapes come into the cellars. It's fantastic because that's our summer. I would probably say that a really good time to come would be spring, early spring, September, all the way through to March, April, even into May. The weather in May is still good. We'll start going into winter. Obviously, we have a Mediterranean climate, so that's when our rains actually start falling. But you know what? Any time of the year is good, and our winters aren't extreme. I mean, we're in the middle of winter today, and I think the temperature is 20 degrees. So it's a little unusual, but I think our coldest time in winter, certainly in Cape Town, Stellenbosch and other areas might be different, but very, very rarely go below freezing. If we do get snow, it'll be a light dusting on the top of the mountains. So pretty much any time. Just depends on when you have available to travel, I suppose.
And doing the math with my head, Fiona, it's 20 degrees Celsius, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So about
So
70 Fahrenheit then. So yeah, very, very mild
Very
for
nice.
winter, certainly. Yeah. But not always that it's not always that warm, is it, Fiona? It's normally a little cooler.
No, no. In winter, generally, the average temperatures would be between 14 and 16 degrees centigrade, Celsius.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, let's learn a little bit more about the actual region itself. So I know I've got some pictures up of, there's a nice map there. We're looking at sort of the different regions. Now, Fiona, I know there's the wine of origin sort of scheme that you have in South Africa. Can you explain that a little more for me?
Yeah, so it's South Africa's attempt to try and narrow down a sort of an appellation contrôlé system. It was begun in 1973 or legislated in 1973 so that people could identify the various areas that wine was being made in. And initially it was just districts, regions, and wards, or regions, districts, and wards, sorry, to get them in the correct order. And subsequently, they then realized that they needed a sort of a larger, overarching geographical unit. So if you're looking at that map there, that would show you a map of essentially the Western Cape. So that would be the geographic unit would be the Western Cape. Then you start drilling down a little more into the coastal region. So that area on the extreme left, which covers everywhere from the Cape Peninsula all the way down to Cape Point. But the good thing about that map is that it illustrates that Cape Point is not actually the most southern tip of Africa. That actually is at Cape Agulhas, which is about 450 kilometers as the crow flies, further south than Cape Point. And that's actually in the Cape South Coast region. So once you've look at that region, let's just take the coastal region, for example. Within the coastal region, you get other districts. So your district you get Stellenbosch, Paarl, Worcester, Wellington, and I'm not sure if Swartland is actually included in that as well. So each one of those is then drilling down and becoming more and more specific. So if you take Stellenbosch, for example, Stellenbosch is your district, but within the Stellenbosch district, there are separate wards. Each of those are geographically distinct from the other. And the wards in this case would be Banghoek, Bottleray, Devon Valley, Jonkershoek Valley, Papagaaieberg, Polka Dry Hills, Simonsburg, Stellenbosch, and Flottenburg. And I would like to ask Marcus if he can say any of those, because Marcus was the one guy who stood out in the trip, trying to really nail down the sort of Afrikaans or Dutch pronunciation. He got really, really good.
So ek praat Afrikaans now. Ek studeer Afrikaans. So since I was there, I just love the people, and I although English is such it's spoken by everyone. I think people appreciate, especially in the agricultural areas where Afrikaans really is the lingua franca. People really appreciate you at least making an effort, just even saying hello, goeiedag, and thank you. So since then, I've just immersed myself in Afrikaans culture and in the Afrikaans language. So I'm having a blast.
Yeah, he was the one guy who could actually say buiten verwachting.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's really impressive. It's a lot of those wards. I've been talking to Fiona about them. They're very very difficult. So, Margos, well done for really embracing that. That's awesome. Just while we have the map up, so Fiona, tell me a little about the topography, because you can see from this it's not flat. There's a lot happening there, and then also I know that Cape Town, for example, is at about latitude of 33.5 or so, which is sort of it's going to be pretty warm. So you sort of we need some cooling influences. So can you speak a little about that?
The obvious cooling influence is maritime. You can see that the maritime influence is pronounced all the way along the west and even down the south.
And then I know there's a fair amount of mountainous area as well. Like you can see there's some flat areas, for example, like Swartland looks very flat, but then you've got these mountains which influence things as well.
Yeah, so that is actually the Cape Fold Mountains. You can see that it is very, very mountainous, and that map is actually quite deceptive. Flat is a very relative term. I mean, it's not flat as it would be on the left bank of the Bordeaux in the Medoc, for example. It's not that flat. flat is generally hilly, and all of those hills actually play quite a dramatic influence on viticulture, because we had a slogan for Wines of South Africa for some years that said diversity is in our nature, and that cuts across both geographical and geological diversity, as well as diversity in plantings, as well as diversity of people and public political opinion. So we are a diverse nation, and we embrace that in all its forms. But the Cape Fold Mountains are really interesting. Are some of the oldest mountains around. They certainly are older than the Rockies, and they're older than the Himalayas, for example. Those are, relative newcomers at 50 million. The Cape Fold Mountains have been geologically aged as between 600 and 350 million years old. And that means that the soils are really, really degraded and old. And it's also one of the reasons why the predominant type of vegetation is called fynbos or fine bush. You very seldom get big, tall trees because they're just the soil. We don't have enough rain in our summers, and also the soil is not rich enough to actually support or sustain that kind of life. So the Cape as a region tends to be quite rocky, quite mountainous, a lot of decomposed granite, shale, clay underpinning that, and shrubby, very, very shrubby. Where you do see trees, they tend to be eucalyptus trees, which were actually imported from Australia. And there is a sustained program to try and eradicate them, because they are both a water and a fire hazard. And of course, South Africa had a terrible drought about 4 years ago. It was a 5-year drought. Sorry, the Western Cape, not South Africa. And we've become very, very attuned to trees sucking moisture out of the environment. So that's one of the reasons why they are getting rid of them.
Okay. Oh, okay. And also, I suppose you can see here a little bit of what you sort of spoke about. You can't see any big trees, and you talked about the diversity, and you can see desert, you can see the ocean, altitude. So there's all these different influences. So really, I mean, South Africa is not a monolith. Every region is going to be very different from one another.
Yeah, and even just in one small region within Stellenbosch, you will find that the different wards within Stellenbosch. So Banhoek, which is the picture on the top right hand side, that's the sort of looking towards the Klein Drakenstein Mountains. The elevation that you get there is much higher than one in Flottenburg, for example, which is closer to the coast. That's about 15 kilometers away from the False Bay coast. So the maritime influence that will be experienced at somewhere like Meerlust, for example, is far more pronounced than it would be in the Banhoek or the Jonkershoek Valley. They at Meerlust, for example, I think their maximum altitude is about 230 meters above sea level, whereas in Banhoek they're far higher. So their solar radiation, terrestrial radiation that they get is completely different. The influence of wind blowing in the afternoon off the False Bay coast, past Meerlust, and then along the Helderberg, for example, into Stellenbosch, is far more pronounced along farms on the Helderberg side than it would be in the Simonsberg, simply because the Simonsberg is another 10 or 15 kilometers further inland. And on the slopes of those mountains, you get a range of different aspects. So on Simonsberg, for example, let me just take Takara as an example, simply because Takara Cabernet was, I've got to shout this to the rooftops. The Decanter World Wine Awards were announced on the 19th of June, and Takara Cabernet from, I think it was the 2021 vintage, took the overall prize for Best in Show. So that's a Cabernet that competed up against the best of France, Australia, California, Chile, Argentina, and it came out tops. And that's on the slopes of the Helderberg. But they have a variety of slopes. They've got north and south-facing slopes. They've got northwest and everything in between. So there's a lot of different elements for winemakers to play with when it comes to making planting decisions and then also making decisions in the winery.
Well, there's a lot happening. And so it's a very diverse place, diverse topography, diverse climate. And I suppose we'd expect then that there's a diverse range of grapes, so as you can see here. Michelle, can you speak to the red grapes that you sort of experienced there? I know that you've had a newfound appreciation for one grape in particular.
Well, Pinotage, I hadn't really explored that. And the opportunity to immerse in understanding the topography, understanding the elements that Fiona just so discussed. It was a really remarkable opportunity, and in addition to that, the Chenin Blanc, something that I haven't really immersed into, and the opportunity to really get involved in seeing the terroir, understanding the soils, looking, walking the vineyards, talking to the winemakers, just an experience I can say I was blown away. I really was. And the appreciation, I think, that all the students that and our fellow travelers had, we were all just really, really impressed. Really impressed. We learned something new every day, and that was my favorite part of the trip.
Wonderful. And then the Marcos, there were some white grapes that I know you were taken with while you were there.
Yeah, again, the variety is just incredible. So up in the middle, we have a couple of wines from Hamilton Russell in Imelinarda, and even though again it's a warm area, but it's the cooling influence of just a little bit of altitude, but especially the Atlantic Ocean is enough to make for beautiful, beautiful Chardonnay as well as Pinot Noir. That whole area of Himelanarda and up in Elgin has wonderful Chardonnay. And just to give you an idea of the quality, but also of the style of Chardonnay that's being made there, Hamilton Russell will actually be up here in Ontario in just a few weeks at the Cold Climate Chardonnay Conference. So it's not just a warm region that we tend to think of. Oh, it's South Africa. It must be hot, must be warm. It can be, and it is many times. But you can also have some beautiful examples of colder climate grapes that we tend to think of. Even Riesling is now being grown, I think, very successfully. I really enjoyed seeing Chardonnay from different regions around the Western Cape. So as I mentioned, the Hamilton Russell wines, the Creation wines from this whole area of Walker Bay. But even if you go up further north to Cedarburg, where now you have high altitude being the major influence, we saw some great wines from Atlas Swift, some great Chardonnays. So I was very taken with the Chardonnay. I've always loved Chenin Blanc, and that is spectacular. But be on the lookout for Chardonnay from South Africa, because I think you will be very, very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Very cool. Fiona, did we miss any of the major grapes or any up and coming grapes that we should know about?
No, I think those are the most important. Obviously, in the sort of the global grapes are incredibly popular. So Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, and Petit Verdot to a lesser degree. Chardonnay, obviously Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is a lot of international visitors to South Africa are impressed by the quality of Sauvignon Blanc because it is an alternative to the New Zealand style. But it has its roots in classic French winemaking tradition. So it kind of straddles both the New World and the Old World. The interesting thing to me is how South Africa's winemakers are trying to future-proof against global warming. So you're finding more and more interesting grape varieties being tried. So Verdelho, Vermentino, Assyrtiko. Assyrtiko is probably the most recent one. Grüne Veltliner And on the red side, certainly Grenache Noir is becoming more and more important in the sort of the national vineyard or grape mix. But yeah, Pinotage. It was interesting to hear you both being so positive about Pinotage, because Pinotage, when it was kind of released and introduced to the world market post 1994, when South Africa kind of re-emerged after our democratic elections, was not very well received. In fact, it was people were generally critical about it, and there's been a phenomenal amount of research that's gone into it, and I must say it's the red grape that probably is the most exciting in South Africa at the moment, simply because it's not one or the other. It's in flux, and people are making really exciting wines and exciting expressions of the wine, and that Hamilton Russell Ashbourne is, which we tasted in the Hemel and Arder Valley. I was, to use Michelle's word, blown away by it. I really, really found the classicism and elegance allied with South African fruit expression because of our warm, generally warm climate, but with a beautiful freshness, was just so impressive.
Yeah, let me add that for many, many years, I was put off by Pinotage. This was 10, 15 years ago. But those wines are in the past. Today's Pinotage can be one of the most elegant wines that you'll ever taste. Intense. They can be fresh, easygoing wines as well. So there's a lot of diversity of Pinotage. We're even seeing uh, rosé of Pinotage. I've seen a white Pinotage. So I think the future for Pinotage is really, really exciting. And I'll remind everybody that next year is the 100th anniversary of the of the creation, if you will, of the crossing of Pinotage, of Sanso and Pinot Noir, and a new era of wines in South Africa. So really excited about it.
Get in and try some Pinotage then if you haven't jumped on it already. Let's jump forward then, and let's start with some bubbles. So Cap Classique is obviously the sparkling wine of South Africa. Michelle, you did some sparkling wine classes, I believe. Can you speak to that?
We did. We did. Fresh, acidic, well balanced, I think are, the three terms that I would say, pop for us. What was surprising, I think, for Toby too, because he's not so much of a wine drinker, but he does enjoy sparkling wines.
I do.
Was the glass tasting that we had? We had a sort of a vertical tasting in with one vintage in glassware, and we were using Riedel glasses that were supplied by the school, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Do you want to chat about that?
Yeah, that to me, again, I'm a neophyte when it comes to a lot of the education, and it was, starting from a position of zero knowledge, I was able to leap forward with the classes, but little things along the way, I would never, if I was going to serve wine at my house, I would never know. Besides asking Michelle, I would never know even sometimes what glass to put it in. But that was more just, I thought, for style. Once we were able to try the same wine out of different glasses, it was absolutely bizarre to me that it could taste, present, smell entirely different in every single different type of glass. And then it tells me, wow, not only is it a question of what does it look good in, but what do you do? Like I realized it taught me more about my ignorance of that topic. And I don't even know that most people even know that the shape of the glass influences the taste of the wine. But to me, that was, I can understand if it was maybe the quality of the glass does something, magical, but this wasn't even the quality. This was the shape. So little things like that along the way are things you can get from this class in this series of classes that I don't know that you could get anywhere else, because it was just those kind of details that to the neophyte were amazing. And again, I don't know if Marcos already knew that, or, if that was something that was a revelation, but to me, that was an absolute revelation. I said this, there's obviously much more than even makes sense to me, because that didn't even make sense until I absolutely was able to verify that this definitely has a different taste. I'll let Fiona and Marcos talk about it too, but
am fortunate enough to have done a number of Riedel glass tastings as well as various other producers, and probably the one which hits home the most is the fact that the Riedel company have made a Coca-Cola glass. And when you
Oh,
taste Coca-Cola out of a normal drinking tumbler, and then you taste it out of the Riedel Coca-Cola glass, you can't believe the difference.
I'm on it.
that's fascinating.
Marcos, anything to add about Cap Classique?
No, I completely agree, and I too, Toby, was very impressed with the difference in taste and experience of each of the wines based on the glass in front of us. So it was wonderful. A great class we had.
Yeah.
Now, before I move on, Cap Classique can come from different places in South Africa. Fiona, is that right?
Yeah, it's not restricted by place or region or district or ward. It is. There are a set of guidelines that the Cap Classique Association, Producers Association, has promulgated, and they have grown, and the category has grown just by leaps and bounds, and it is all done to try and increase the quality. Um, and you're now beginning to see, particularly UK wine writers, talking about South African Cap Classique as an alternative and a valid style on its own, rather than a wannabe champagne. And the styles vary from rosé, ultra brut, right the way through to the demi sec. Demi sec is probably the most recent emerging category. But certainly the minimum required is 12 months on lees before bottling. That's the one standard they do insist upon. And then, traditional grapes, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, which there isn't a lot of in South Africa. There are very few producers who actually have it. But then they are not so restrictive that they don't allow for Chenin Blanc and Pinotage and various other grapes to be used. So you will very often find Cap Classique made, for example, at Ken Forrester. They do a Chenin Blanc bubbly, Cap Classique, and there are others who use different grapes. But generally, the more serious producers, the ones who are focused on the category, tend to stick to Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Okay. So let's move from Cap Classique, which can come
Can
from a
I
lot
add
of different areas.
something?
Oh, of
Let me
course.
add something to the Cap Classique story, because to me it's one of the examples of why South African winemaking and wine producing is so exciting. Cap Classique only started in 1971, so it's just a few years old, and it has achieved international notoriety. It's achieved amazingly high quality levels. So to me, it's just the perfect example of how vibrant the winemaking in South Africa is, how advanced the winemakers are in their not just in their techniques but in their can-do attitudes. So kudos to South Africa, and again, this to me is a perfect example of what South Africa has done in the last 50 years and where it can be in the next 50.
Definitely. Now you can see in the top right.
And
Oh,
sorry,
sorry.
just one point I'd like to add to what Marcus has already said, and it alludes to what both Michelle and Toby noted earlier on, is that the value you're getting, bang for your buck, to put it as crassly as that, because the exchange rate is what it is. You can happily buy the best examples of South African Cap Classique, and it you wouldn't believe the prices in dollar terms.
Yeah, definitely. So up in the top right, you can see we're at the Cape Wine Academy, which I believe is in Stellenbosch. So let's move on to Stellenbosch then. Fiona, can you tell me about Stellenbosch? I believe it's the heart of the wine industry there, but tell me about the styles, maybe a little about the climate.
Yeah, Stellenbosch is definitely the heart of the heartland, the homeland of wine South Africa. It probably has the most wine farms. It's the most accessible, the most sophisticated. The touristic offering is off the charts. It's where foreign buyers want to invest. It's also where some of the most historic wine farms are actually located. The diversity in areas from south to north and west to east is startling. You take Jordan, for example, which is kind of on the western side near the Porkadry Hills. They boast north, south, east, and west aspects for their grapes. So there's pretty much anything and everything that they can do. One thing that you are seeing happen is a better focus. So because during the apartheid era, the market was predominantly local, most of the competition would be between areas. So Paarl would be competing against Stellenbosch for the consumer rand, and as a result of that, they pretty much, most wine farms tried to make everything. So they tried to have a Sauvignon Blanc and a Chardonnay and a Chenin, as well as a Pinotage and a Cab and a Bordeaux blend and a Merlot, and everything in between. And what Stellenbosch producers in particular are doing is that they are refining their offerings. So you're finding more and more wine farms and producers actually saying, well, if you want a good Sauvignon Blanc, why don't you try Durbanville or Constantia, because they're cooler and they have more expressive Sauvignon Blanc. So Stellenbosch is kind of focusing on Chenin Blanc and Chardonnay. Cabernet certainly, and Bordeaux blends do exceptionally well there. In terms of weather, hot, dry summers. February tends to be when the hottest heat spikes occur, and that's when you have average degree days over 30, 35, and possibly even higher. Average rainfall in Stellenbosch is in the region of 700 to 750 millimeters per year, which is higher than the Swartland or the Breda River Valley, for example. Swartland is much hotter and drier. It's predominantly a wheat farming area, so low rainfall. I think they get in the region of 300 to 450 millimeters a year. So you can see that there's quite a significant difference in availability of moisture for vine growing. Stellenbosch is really sophisticated in terms of their vineyard practices, in terms of soil mapping, matching grapes to soil types and terroir, the use of drones to even drill down into single vineyard, picking areas, smaller parcels within a single vineyard, and then vinifying it separately so that they can have different options available to them when it comes to making blends. Meerlust, for example, I was there a week ago, and they have identified 4 separate geographical units on their 400, 500 hectare property. They've only got about 80 hectares under vine, 20 of which are still in the process of coming up to age because they've been replanted. So they've got 60 hectares currently in production. And they have 4 separate areas. So they have Area 1, which is a low-lying closest to the sea. When I say closest to the sea, it's about 4.5 kilometers away. They have another area that's near an old granite quarry. So the soils there, they've got grey whack, they've got decomposed granite. They have a third area which is low-lying down next to the Eerste River, which is actually the river that runs through Stellenbosch to the sea. And then they've got north and northwest facing slopes, which back onto the sort of the Macassar Fora hillside. And that's where the bulk of their red vine plantings are, their Merlot, their Cab, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc. So it's varied.
Yeah, it sounds very precise with what they're doing. So it's really, let's do what we do best, which I think is a great philosophy to have because it means we're drinking better wine. Marcos, when you were there, I'll leave I know you all had a great experience with food. We'll leave that towards the end. But Marcos, with the wine experience there, did anything stand out to you?
In Stellenbosch, definitely two producers. One, Kanonkop, which you see on the bottom left, which make not only wonderful Bordeaux style wines, but the best Pinotage, in my opinion, and one of the best wines that I've ever tasted, which is their black labeled Pinotage. So they're on the Simmonsburg Stellenbosch ward. They're a little bit, just on the slopes of the Simmonsburg mountain facing south. So it's a little bit cooler, and that's very, very beneficial for Pinotage to be able to keep some of the freshness, some of the acidity. But the history, especially of Pinotage, and seeing their library, which is the bottom right picture, was truly spectacular, and having a nice sampling of many of their wines. That was a highlight. And the other highlight for me was in the Polka Dry Hills, one of my favorite producers for many years. It's a smaller boutique producer, De Toren, and tasting their Bordeaux varietals, Bordeaux blends, was just one of the best experiences I've ever had in wine. I got to spend a morning with Charles Williams, their winemaker, and it really was a dream come true for me. But there is just so much all throughout Stellenbosch that it's hard to go wrong.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Michelle, I know that this is where you got your appreciation for Pinotage, but also there was a nectar wine that you mentioned that changed your philosophy a little bit on sweeter wines.
Yeah, we really enjoyed the sweeter dessert wines. I think Toby was definitely on board with those. But we had gone to now I'm going to Marcos can pronounce this much better than I can, but Buitenverwachting. And we spent a day or some time there during our trip that really impacted us because Lars Mack, the owner of the vineyard, came out and spent some time with us. And I'll tell you, one of the most wonderful things I experienced is when folks would see Fiona, the wine producers, the owners of the vineyards, and they'd throw their arms open and say, "Fiona, you are here. This is wonderful." We were welcomed, and we spent an afternoon speaking with Lars Mack and his experience, his journey through two generations of winemaking. And they had a very special nectar wine there that we will not soon forget. It was just remarkable. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so from Stellenbosch then, which as you can see here is, only about 30 minutes from the international airport in Cape Town. So really, if you go to Cape Town, you sort of have to visit Stellenbosch. But let's go a little closer to Cape Town then, and let's check out Constantia. Did I pronounce that right, Fiona?
Yeah, absolutely.
Getting better. Not at Marcos level yet. Fiona, can you tell us about Constantia? It's incredibly famous, very important, but it's only a ward, I believe. It's not even a district.
Mm. Yeah, it actually falls under Cape Town, which is a bone of some contention for the producers in Constantia. So Constantia was actually where wine cultivation and grape growing was first conducted in South Africa at Kruit Constantia. And the point is always made that we're the one wine industry in the world that knows precisely when it began, simply because the governor at the time, Governor Jan van Riebeeck, wrote in his diary in February, "Today, praise be to God, the first grapes were crushed at the Cape of Good Hope." And that was 363 or 4 years ago, I think it was. So that's pretty remarkable that South Africa has had a history that does stretch as long as that. But its modern history really stems from post 1994. So Constantia itself is that little peninsula that you see that sticks out. Its predominant influence is from cooling breezes from False Bay, which is the bay, the nice little semicircle bay from the south. Most of the slopes of the grapes are cultivated. The vineyards are on south-facing slopes. Yeah, that's the false bay. Nice little red arrow there. And the winds can be quite severe at times, and it has a distinct cooling effect, which is why Sauvignon Blanc and to a lesser degree Semillon do particularly well in the area. There aren't a vast number of producers, so it's if you are in Cape Town, you could comfortably do the area in one day. It's easy to access. Most wine farms will happily take walk-ins, and you will have a variety of different tastings offered to you. Although many of the producers do make red wines, red wine is not really their focus, simply because it can be too cool. Having said that, there are some excellent examples from producers who are higher up on the slope, on the Constantiaberg, and here specifically I'm thinking of Constantia Glen and also Eagle's Nest. Eagle's Nest do a fantastic Shiraz, and Constantia Glen does a magnificent 5-element Bordeaux blend. Yeah, so the historic one, obviously, it's with Constantia. That was where the former governor of the Cape, and the guy who's kind of credited with a lot of the improvement of South Africa's initial grape cultivation efforts, Simon van der Stel. He was governor at the time. He's the chap who kind of said grapes will do well at this southern tip of Africa.
Excellent. Okay. I just want to comment on how much I love this photo. Actually, I think, Marcos, you took this photo, but you've got obviously the vineyards there. Looks like you've got Table Mountain. You can see out to the bay, into False Bay. A little bit of suburbia sneaking in there as well.
So Table Mountain is actually, Table Mountain is actually to the back. That's looking down south. That's down towards Cape Point.
Okay. The rest of it I was correct on, though.
This is from Fruit Constantia, which is a beautiful, beautiful property. Definitely worth going. Nice restaurants, a lot of the history, a wonderful museum as well. So highly recommend it.
Now, Marcus, I know these are some of your photos here. We've got a wine called Vin de Constance. Could you tell me about that?
Yeah, so Vin de Constance is, I would venture to say, probably South Africa's most famous wine historically. It was produced many, many years ago and came to fame in the 1800s. You will always hear the history of Napoleon when he was exiled, importing, I think it was 30 bottles of Vin de Constance every month. And it is said to be the last thing that touched his lips before he died. So a lot of history. Because of phylloxera and other reasons, it fell out of favor until the last few years in the 1980s when Vin de Constance was reanimated, if you will, at Klein Constantia, which is a property that we all got to go together and not only taste some of the wines, but also be in the vineyard, seeing some of what you're seeing here in the bottom slides, which is just very, very late harvest Muscat de Frontignan, which is the grape that's used in making this beautiful, fresh, highly acidic, sweet wine, which is probably my favorite dessert wine. Certainly over Tokai and Sauterne. I love this wine. It is a non-fortified wine. It's a naturally sweet wine, and it gets all the sweetness from the sun concentrating the sugars in these grapes that, as you can see there, are quite dehydrated. So it's a wine that is made with grapes that are picked over a period of several weeks by hand, obviously, one by one. A very costly process, but crafting some of the most wonderful sweet wines that you'll ever taste.
That's very cool. I love the pictures of the dried grapes there. Fiona, how long do they have to wait for them to get that dry? After you normally harvest them when they're uh, ripe grapes, but they're looking for over extra ripeness here. How much longer does
Yeah.
that take?
I think if memory serves me correct, they can pick anywhere from it'll be mid to late season, mid-season, because generally your whites will come in early. So they do have some red on Clan Constantia, so they will still be busy harvesting reds as well. So they just leave the muscat to do its own thing, and they actually go through and although you can see that bunch on the bottom left hand corner, they will actually go through and select individual berries. I mean, that's how meticulous they are. They actually go in and pick out those berries which are like the one you can see between, I think it's Marcus's fingers. That it's almost a raisin. So the
Yeah.
juice recovery on that is incredibly low. It is an immense labor of love. But what Marcus was saying is it's one of the most spectacularly, hauntingly beautiful, ethereal, yet thrilling wines you can get to taste.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that picture. You could be a finger model, Marcos. I think there.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
very cool. And then Michelle, I know there was another wine from Constantia that you really loved, the 1769. Can you tell us about that?
Correct. I loved the history of this particular wine as well. Again, a sweet wine from the Constancia region. It was, we spent some time talking about the history, and as Fiona mentioned, that the harvesting that had been started in South Africa, the winemaking had been started in South Africa. It's almost interesting that we call it a New World wine, because it really is very much Old World. And so I loved the fact that they called this 1769 to remind the rest of the winemaking world that, in fact, grapes had been grown, harvested, and produced as wine from the late 1700s. And so this was particularly, I think I referenced our conversation with Lars a little earlier, and this is one of the wines we really enjoyed as well. It was just it was just a special afternoon, and I think that just the whole surroundings really make not just your palate sing, but your whole heart sing as you take in the food and the people and the wine itself. It was remarkable.
That's awesome.
So the difference with the Bacon Verwachting is that that's actually a noble late harvest. So it's made in as Sauterne would be made through the influence of botrytis, of noble rot. Whereas as the Klein Constantia van der Constance is a natural sweet. There's no botrytis whatsoever.
Awesome. And then Marcos, do you know what the grapes were in the background there?
I am guessing it's Sauvignon Blanc, but I can't be certain.
Okay, wow. Awesome. What an area to visit. I think the history and the different wines that they've got, it's just so close to Cape Town. I think it's definitely a must visit. So let's head south then. So let's head to, I apologize in advance, Hamel and Ade. Fiona, how do I pronounce that?
Hemel en aarde. So it
Hemel en
means heaven
aarde.
and earth. So heaven is hemel, and aarde is earth. So that's actually in the town of Hermanus, and unfortunately, it was rather grey and rainy and wet when the group was there. But normally, it's fantastic. It's one of that bay, Walker Bay, is actually where whales actually come to calve. Anywhere from July all the way through to November. So it's kind of season now when the whales are arriving from down south, and the whale sightings in the bay just from the town of Hermanus are second to none.
Can you tell me about it looks like it's close to right by the ocean there. So is it cooler then as a result? Is it, are they growing more of the cool climate kind of grapes?
Correct. So it is much further south than the other wine regions, as you can see. And the interesting thing about Walker Bay is there's a very narrow area between the sea, and it rises, it shelves very, very quickly up to a ridge. And on the other side of that ridge from the town of Hermanus is where the Hemelanade Valley is. And it's a very it's not a deep valley, but it's not a wide valley. And here, Hamilton Russell were the pioneers of that area, in defiance of the government, the apartheid government of the day, the National Party government, who used to dictate what could be planted and where. And this was the Hamilton Russell family holiday home. They had a little farm there, and they would go down to Hermanus for their annual holidays. And Tim Hamilton Russell was a lover of wine, and he said, "Well, let's plant grapes and see how they do." And that was what has led to kind of Chardonnay and Burgundy, the South Africa's version of Burgundy, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir Central, in the whole area. They went from one producer to two producer, and then from two to four, and then from 4 to 8, and now there's a whole heap more than that. And the area, the viticultural area, has actually expanded further and further up the valley, going all the way through to Creation. And Creation is probably one of the newer kids on the block, but it's been around for about 10 or 15 years now. And they established their vineyards on what was sheep pasture. And their climatic and soil, all of the influences are completely different to Hamilton Russell, which is just 10 kilometers away further down the valley. Two totally separate areas in terms of influence. And as a result of that, Creation makes things like, they do Chardonnay and Pinot Noir exceptionally well, but they also have things like Grenache, Viognier, Roussanne, and a host of other different grapes. And Merlot is doing particularly well for them as well.
Michelle, I know you loved Creation Winery. Can you tell us about your experience there?
Yeah, I just felt that the story behind the winery was fantastic. As Fiona said, it was crafted off of a sheep farm. So as you enter, you're really feeling like you're, I guess, I would say that they probably didn't have a road system to actually even get to the area until maybe 10 years ago. So we arrived and we were greeted. We sat down and had our tasting. That again, the owners of the vineyard came over. They talked to us. They really expressed what they were about. Their story was fantastic as well. I think that was really remarkable. But beautiful location. The complexity of the Chardonnay, I thought, was what really captured me about the wines that stood out in that particular vineyard. But it was a wonderful experience. Their hospitality was fantastic. We had opportunity to actually speak to the owners, the winemaker, where that type of interaction, I think, was really remarkable. I don't know if they do that every day, but if they do, kudos to them, because it was just it was beautiful. I mean, it's not only just it is the wine, but it's also your experience as you're tasting, as you're learning and appreciating something different in a style that might be a little bit different than what we would experience from a California style.
And then Marcos, your experience in that, around Walker Bay, and what did you think?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think Hamilton Russell, what they're doing with Pinot Noir and with Chardonnay is spectacular. But also their Pinotage, I think, is the wave of the future for Pinotage. Other exciting producers there. We went to Bouchard Finlayson. Ataraxia is also there, and I really like the wines that they're making. So it's just an area of that I think shows the future of quality winemaking in the Western Cape. I was very happy to be there.
Very cool. And I think it's more of a drive. Sorry.
That's right. If I can kind of piggyback, I think one of the things that was amazing about this particular week was exactly. I mean, while everyone else was studying the wines and the flavors and the details, I was studying the people and the owners and the vineyard, just because that's what I do. And I don't. I mean, you can go to a vineyard and you can get a tour, and you might meet the owner, and he'll come out and shake your hand and say, "That's really nice to meet you." Give you maybe a 5-minute overview, but you don't get the level of of detail and questions and answers and appreciation, and the feeling like you are, that you're a student and you are in front of, you got the master, storytellers in front of you telling you everything you want to know, with Fiona backing the whole thing up later to even like clarify more. It's an experience. I was impressed from the outside watching in, just saying, wow, this is done. This is the way education should be, and not necessarily just, a 5 minute, greet you, shake your hand, and, move on with the rest of the tour. That was the details and it wasn't always just the owners. Sometimes you'd catch other people on other specific topics, whether it was from the picking side, the processing side, mechanization side, the all of it. It was just amazing to see the level of detail you could get, without even knowing that that's what was going on. I think that's the difference, is that the tour wasn't just a tour. It was a full education experience. And that was at each vineyard. And it was often 2 to 3 times a day that you were getting that experience at different places. So outstanding.
Toby, tell us about visiting, I believe it's the Aquila Reserve.
Oh, it was amazing. Again, it was compact. It was a full, felt like afternoon tour, maybe 3 hours or so. But it was just the ability to be with the same people that you were studying one thing with, and I was able to to now be in a different element. So I took a lot of photos as we were there. I mean, that's how close we were to things. Those are all my photos, and that's how close we were to the lioness. I mean, it was impressive, and I think the ability to have a different experience it was toward the end, if not at the end. It was just a nice down day where you took a little bit of a break from wine, but yet you were still surrounded by everyone, a buzz from the wine experience. So it was great, and that was just a nice additional opportunity that we had to add to our trip. So
Yeah,
it made for
amazing.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it's always something, you grow up learning all about the animals of Africa, and it's very cool I think to finally see them. So it's definitely on my bucket list to get there and do that. Fiona, looks like you
And
have something to mention.
there are more and more wine farms, even in and around Stellenbosch, that actually have game camps. So Vergelegen, for example, another tongue twister, is in the Hottentots Holland Mountains. It's a 3,000 hectare. It's a huge place, and they actually do offer game drives. They've got Bontebok, Eland. There was actually a scientific study to try and re-engineer the quagga, which is a now extinct species. Valera have game drives as well, and they have giraffe, eland, anything from bat-eared foxes to smaller game species, springbok, and Grotepost up near Darling. They also have a game enclosure with a variety of games. So you can do them within about an hour of Stellenbosch. And it can be part of your wine tasting. So you don't have to specifically go to a safari park to get the game, a toned down game experience. You won't get rhino or elephant or lion, but that's some really stunning pictures there, Toby. Looks like you had a good time. And I know you went on to KwaZulu-Natal afterwards, didn't you? To Zulu and Nyala?
Yes, we did. That was another whole adventure for us. But we figured once we've traveled that far, let's do it all. So that was an additional journey, but that was an opportunity that we had because we were there too. So we bundled it all together.
So definitely stay an extra couple of days to do some other fun things as well. Beyond the very cool animals that are local there, there's also some other cool things you can do around Cape Town. I believe, Toby, Marcos, that's you on the top left at the Cape of Good Hope.
Yes, I was definitely not on the top right or the Shark Cape. But yeah, it's again a beautiful area going south of Cape Town, going along the bay, Houts Bay. You see some amazing landscapes, and then you get to the Cape of Good Hope, which, as you pointed, is not the southernmost place in Africa, but it's a beautiful place. You really experience the wind. And it's just an exciting day on the way back or on the way down. You can stop at Boulders Bay and see the penguins. You can stop at any of the fishing villages and have amazing seafood. See how snook is dried, a fish that is very popular in South Africa, and you can see it all over the place drying. And there is a non-wine world out there as well. But I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that in addition to wine, I think South Africa makes one of the best brandies in the world. And so if you like brandy, please do yourself a favor, taste some of the brandy. If you can go to Van Rijn, just outside of Stellenbosch, it's a wonderful distillery. You can do a tasting there, a chocolate pairing with brandy, and just something to take a break from wine.
Or you can jump in a cage with a shark. That's
Yeah,
yet another option you can do there.
for
We do
some
like
people.
we do like to finish these travel panels with food, because typically where there's good wine, there is good food, and South Africa is no exception. Um, Marcos, can you tell us about some of these images?
So South African food scene is all about meat, whether it's lamb or beef, especially. And so here are just some examples on the top right. The South African pastime of braai, or barbecuing out in the open over a wood fire. And I think at the bottom two slides we have some lamb, which happens to be my favorite. I enjoyed the one on the left with a beautiful wine from Ataraxia that was Sanso and Pinot Noir, and but it's beef everywhere, and some of the best beef, some of the best lamb that you'll ever have. There are a lot of other dishes as well. Boboti is one of my favorites, which is a Malay spicy, but more curry spicy dish. I think you can see it there on the bottom left. That was actually at Grotepost at
Mhm.
Hilda's Kitchen, and on the bottom right you have malva pudding, which is an amazing dessert. It's a sponge cake that's just completely soaked in deliciousness, and you can have it with cream or you can have it with ice cream. And as you can see there, I had it with both.
And I know that I think the photo at the top is at the Fat Butcher, which all of you
Yes.
raved about to me. Uh, Toby and Michelle, can you tell me about the Fat Butcher?
Wow, this, as Marco said, it's really all about the meat, and I think I'll just, this will also sort of fold into the example of the value that you get. There were six of us that dined, and we had beautiful filet mignon steaks, and everybody had something a little different. We had some wonderful appetizers, salads. We went right into the dessert. And
Two
I
bottles
think,
of wine.
and two bottles of Pinotage that were fantastic. And I think it was $125 for six
All of
people.
us.
For six people, 125 US dollars. The Fat Butcher is a must, and also Hussar's Grill.
Hussar
I
Grill,
think
yeah.
in Stellenbosch were the two restaurants we really enjoyed while we were in Stellenbosch. That was a highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a connoisseur of steaks and red meats and things like that. And so for me, I mean, we were there, and I said the bigger cut of filet, big appetizers, big salad, big dessert, two bottles of excellent wine, a couple extra things we added on, and again, the total, it might have been like, I think it was 120 something dollars, or close to 130 American dollars for all six of us. And I was, when we started to try to divide the bill, and I started to realize, like, we're dividing, like, that's not individually, that's, we're dividing the whole bill, because back here in the States, obviously, that's, that could be one person at dinner for that kind of a meal. And it was good. It was a high end steak. It wasn't, inexpensive. It was a high end steakhouse in Stellenbosch, a somewhat resort college town, higher end. It was amazing, the value. So that's just one example, and that carried everywhere. It wasn't just, a special deal there. Every time you went to buy something, you just shook your head and said, am I calculating this correctly? And always you were. It was just an amazing deal. So South Africa itself is a great place to go for value. The trick obviously is getting there. But once you're there, you can live large with very little, expense comparatively to here in the States anyway.
Toby, I think every time I saw you, you were eating a steak.
I think you are correct, and they were good steaks. You mentioned it earlier, but it was not just, it wasn't just beef. It was, filet mignon, and it was an excellent cut and some of the best, red meat that again, that's what I eat. So,
and the flavors too, the braai that we experienced at Boschendal, it was absolutely fantastic. It was really, really wonderful. I brought home some spices as well as some wines.
Yeah.
Fiona, did we miss anything obvious with the food scene? It sounds amazing, but is there anything else that we may have missed?
No, I think everybody's hit it well. Just that there are a host more restaurants to try, certainly in Stellenbosch and elsewhere, and a lot of really good restaurants are on wine farms too. So Takara, which you guys visited Takara, but their restaurant is superb, and there are any number of wine farms which boast restaurants which are as good, and they are, South Africans are hearty eaters, and they expect to eat well, and the gastronomic scene, particularly here in the Cape, is the most vibrant in the country. And the good news is that Franschhoek tops Stellenbosch to a certain degree, because it has styled itself as the gourmet capital of South Africa, and it raises the bar even higher in a kind of a more classical French tradition than in Stellenbosch. But you can still get a good steak in Franschhoek.
Good.
Excellent. We've gone a little over the hour, so I do apologise for that, but I do want to thank Michelle, Toby and Marcos. These are all your photos. I just thought they were completely stunning. So thank you for that, but also your experiences and for sharing those. It's really insightful, and I think we've learned a lot through your stories. So thank you very much. And then Fiona, a true expert on South African wine. Thank you for your insight, your expertise. It sounds like an amazing place. I would love to go. It's on my list now. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.